So we are back, and I want to introduce two of the participants of our next portion. We're going to have a conversation about XR and VCs in XR. Two of the leading VCs in XR are here with us. I want to introduce Amy LaMeyer from the Women in XR Fund, who I know very well. Hey, Amy. And
nice
also Greg and also Greg Castle from Anorak Ventures. And Rich is going to be leading this conversation. So over to you, Rich.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kathy. So been down this path before, helping connect mission-focused customers with innovative solutions within the government can be really challenging. But a key aspect, if you're going to have success in that, is to work closely with the investment community, often represented by venture capital investors. Their insight and access is critical to actually achieving success. So I want to just kind of level set this thing for those of you who may not be very familiar with the ins and outs of what venture capital is and how it works. In an incredibly simplified nutshell, venture capital is private financing that investors provide to companies that they see great potential in. They do that in return for a stake of the company in some form or fashion. This is way more of an art than a science. Nothing is guaranteed. Everybody wants to find the next unicorn, the next Palantir, the next snowflake. But for every one of those that are the next unicorn, there are many others that go bust. But because of that, reducing risk is a major focus for VCs. To do that, successful ones plug themselves deeply into the development, research, technology, and entrepreneur communities, and into the customer spaces who are driving demand for those communities. And as such, they're one of the most valuable resources for understanding trends, fluctuations, and the future of tech and business they focus on. We're very lucky today to be joined by two successful venture capitalists in this arena with Amy and Greg. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
So I was hoping you could just give us a quick rundown of yourselves and your funds. Amy?
Sure. So again, I'm Amy LaMeyer. I'm with WXR Fund. It stands for Women in XR, or Extended Reality. And we invest in early stage companies that are using VR, AR, or AI to transform businesses and enable communication. With a female founder, so definitely a diversity focus there. In the past, I worked for a company called Akamai Technologies, helping to build and scale the internet.
Hi, guys. I'm Greg Castle. I run a fund called Anorak Ventures. I was lucky enough to be a very early investor in Oculus, and so have really watched the XR industry mature. The defense space is of great interest to me. I think from a mission standpoint, just ensuring that our military and defense has the best technology available to it, I think is just something that I believe should be the case. I'm also an investor in Anduril, which is also serving the defense industry, and another company called One Brief. It's a pleasure and an honor to be in front of you guys who are serving the country, and hopefully some of my knowledge and Amy's knowledge can help you guys do your jobs better. Thanks.
Great. So really simple question up front. So as investors, you guys have a front seat to many of these cutting edge technologies, and you're seeing stuff that right now is on the drawing board or even is being ready to be deployed. What's getting you excited in the XR market today?
I'll jump in. One of the things I think is most exciting is just the awareness and comfort of both the market, the consumers and enterprises, and hopefully the public sector as well, for connecting virtually and understanding how we can take that to the next level. It's really a rare opportunity, and there's a convergence right now of several different technologies that are coming together to enable extended reality, as Kathy was talking about, and that's everything from 5G to the new VR headsets, faster processors, advances in mobile, like Apple came out with a LiDAR on their new iPhone yesterday. and enabling software engines that enable content creation. So having all of those things come together at a time when the pandemic is also highlighting the ability to communicate virtually and interact virtually is it's a pretty exciting time.
I would say the general ecosystem is what's exciting me today. I think you guys as part of the defense community are likely aware that VR has been around for quite some time. Many of the innovations starting in the defense sector, but it's always been a toy or a tool for a privileged few. It's incredibly expensive. It's difficult to work on. There aren't that many people who really understand it. But as time has gone on and the technology has advanced, and there's been more companies that have come in to make it easier to access this technology, there is now a thriving ecosystem for developers, for manufacturers, and there's more standardization. And so prices are dropping, accessibility is increasing. And so, whereas previously perhaps, you would have to only go to a very specialized few contractors to be able to design custom software, now it's much more widely available. And I think that will help with the proliferation of various forms of XR and for loads of different applications in loads of different industries.
You both mentioned it, kind of talking about the enablement that's going on here, whether it's the ecosystem coming up here or even some of the technology enablers that are out there. They're going to make it successful. This technology area is moving fast, and there are a lot of startups that are driving in here, and a lot of big companies are getting involved and spending lots of stuff in here. The pace of innovation is really incredible. When you look at the XR landscape, is there something that surprised you, either in that seems to have been bypassed and somebody has not passed in that area, or you were not expecting it and they made a leap beyond what you thought was not possible?
Yeah, for me, I think a little bit of a lack of attention to audio and audio quality and enabling natural language processing and integrating that. I think that a lot of the AR, VR attention has been on visuals, which obviously makes sense, and a little bit on haptics, which is useful as well. But I'd love to see a little bit more attention on audio quality and interaction.
I'm bummed that there is really only one main player in the industry, to be honest with you. I would have thought that it would have been more. I'm specifically referring to VR at the moment, but Facebook and Oculus is really they're really the main game in town. I mean, there's other people who are producing headsets, but really, Facebook is the one who's producing them at scale and really putting the R&D dollars behind headsets. I would have hoped that there would have been, that Microsoft would have leaned in heavier, that some of the other companies would have. I think, competition ultimately benefits consumers. And so we would have just had more variety, and maybe things would have been moving a bit quicker.
Along those lines, Greg, I'd like to get your kind of thoughts and general impressions on the health of the XR, AR, VR market today. Some of the VR bets of a few years ago didn't pan out, right? And they've struggled to meet the returns that people were expecting of that. Mm-hmm. As you look at and consider making investments, or you consider engaging with a company, what do you need to see in these companies to be able to pull that trigger, to be able to take that next step with them?
Well, on the topic of the general health of the industry, so two different parts, right? One is VR, the other one is AR. I think we're still quite a ways away from AR being mass. I think that there are applications in for more specialized sectors like defense. But I think, in terms of seeing real interesting numbers and, for consumers, I think we're probably, at least 5 years out for AR. For VR, I think 2021 is going to be an interesting year. There's a lot of predictions that the Quest 2, which Oculus just shipped, is going to end up shifting somewhere in the realm of kind of 6 to 8 million units. 6 to 8 million units is interesting because the first iPhone shifted roughly 6 to 8 million units. So there's kind of, a trajectory path that you can follow along for that. Look, everybody has a phone. Everybody needs a phone. So, the applications probably aren't as wide, but it's an interesting number nonetheless. With regard to your question on kind of what do I look for, I think, I really believe that these are all tools. These are all different technology tools from a hardware perspective. You've got your phone, you've got a laptop that you're speaking, that I'm speaking to you on right now. You've got a desktop. You've got different tools depending on what you're trying to achieve and where you are. I think virtual reality is another one of these tools, but is just one part of kind of the chain of ways in which we'll interact with technology. And so I look for interoperability, and I look for companies that are thinking about the whole a holistic viewpoint of how we interact with technology. So, if I am looking at an application, if I'm using an application to be able to jump into a space and visualize a product, a design, anything in 3D, and I want to be able to collaborate and use all of the innate benefits of VR, where VR really is the best medium to be able to interact, then that's great. But then I'm going to take off that headset and I'm going to go on about my day, and I'm going to be doing different things. And so I just look for companies that are considering the whole thing. So what is your application when you're outside of VR to interact with that technology on my phone, on my computer? So interoperability outside of VR, to sum up, what I look for when I'm making investments now.
So interesting. It's almost like you're looking for an extended vision from them. They have to have that focus on their product, but they have to have the vision for how they're going to interact with other products that are out there or other mechanisms and means out there. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, I think similar to other emerging technologies, this is a path, and there's a transition time that we'll be experiencing as we go through it, just like we did with mobile, just like we did with the internet. But to Greg's point, this is a technology and a tool that will ultimately impact all industries and all consumers, right? In the further away future, our phones will be replaced, and we will be able to interact digitally with heads up and hands free, integrating with the world, and that will be phenomenal. Kids that are being born today will ask us, why did we have flat screens, right? Why did you not do things in a more spatial and a more humanistic manner? And so, but that's again, to what Greg was saying, that's further down the field. Hardware is hard, and smart glasses are really hard. And although Apple and other folks are, Facebook included, working in that area, there'll be a time from now until then that we'll walk down that path. And some of those things are things like mobile AR that Kathy was showing. So, again, using our phones, which is a pretty powerful computer, to be able to interact with digitally with the real world. And to Greg's point, I think we're finally at a point with VR headsets where cost and comfort and the content is finally coming together to actually make that accessible to more people and to more businesses for that matter as well.
I'm looking forward to the overlords putting a chip in my head so I can do VR. Well, along those lines for what you're mentioning, do you see any specific impediments that are causing impact in this and slowing it down from a technology? I mean, we talk about the technology platform space, but are there cultural or regulatory challenges there? And from a technology, you mentioned earlier, Greg, this kind of standardization. One of the big challenges has been in this space, everybody built their own specialized language everywhere. And it's really hard when you've got 500 development languages to get a kind of a seamless connection going on there. Is there areas there that you see that there are impediments that are slowing down the market adoption?
I mean, look, hardware is tough. We're trying to do very difficult things, from resolution on screens to battery efficiency to compute. We're trying to shrink all of the, and look, graphics processing is incredibly complex. There's a reason why, NVIDIA is putting out these different GPUs every year that are, these things are big and they're heavy to process that kind of compute that you need to create photorealistic graphics. So shrinking all of that stuff down and wearing it on your head is a very difficult problem, which is, one of the reasons why I said that I wish that there was more competition by the big producers. But I really think, and furthermore, I think, and again, the military knows this better than most sectors. You are much less forgiving. The closer something is to your face, the less tolerance you have for a poorly designed product. You notice things that are on your head, that are on your face, and so weight and balance and all of these things, it's an incredibly difficult product to design really well. I remember hearing stories actually related to defense and military, where there were several different designs that were created for soldiers, for night vision, for battlefield intelligence, different things like that. And I was speaking to a SEAL once about them, and he was basically saying, we all just flip them up or we put them in our backpack. Because when you're in these situations, you can't have this big weighty thing, in front of your face. So anyway, all that to say that I think that the biggest impediment right now that I see is just creating a really, what you really want is something that you put on like a pair of glasses that's super lightweight, that lasts all day from a battery perspective, and you can kind of put it on and forget about it. What we still have, even with the Oculus 2, is something that, still weighs quite a bit, still only has a few hours charge. It's certainly usable, but it's not, a seamless integration, let's say, of technology and the human form.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add beyond that, the hardware itself, there's the design and how we interact spatially in 3D. And that is a whole new way of functioning as well. Just like we created the mouse for the laptop, we need to figure out how do we carry things. And, virtual reality is slightly different than augmented reality. And how do all of those things work? So there's a lot of folks looking into that as well. What I'm excited about that is that I think the people that are creating that now are more diverse, right? So, and thinking in terms, more broadly in terms of inclusion and accessibility and those form factors. So I'm actually pretty excited about how, and hopeful about how those design mechanisms and how we'll interact with this new computing platform in a more global and diverse way.
I'm also interested, watching we're seeing now with this generation of kids that are growing up with an iPhone, right? They have an iPhone from the time they're a baby and they're doing that. The way they interact with phones is so different, the way they can leverage those. I think as you were talking to earlier, Amy, this next generation of kids where VR and AR and 3D rendering stuff is just kind of normal for them, it's going to change their expectations. And to your point, Greg, I think that some of the folks out there, the expectations within the military folks that are doing it now, this is something they're not used to. And you put something new in, you're distracting me for other things that are doing. If it's part of my normal life, I'll accept it and adopt it much more easily. So since this is an event where we're really focusing on kind of the public sector and the government space, I want to kind of pull that thread a little bit more. When it comes to extended, augmented, virtual reality and these technologies that are going here, what do you think government leaders should be paying attention to these days? What areas do you see significant potential for impact that you'd like to see them embrace more fully?
Sure. So I'll jump in. I think that so there's this term that's been used quite a bit called digital twinning, which essentially means that you have a digital representation of physical objects and of physical space. And this is interesting because digital objects, of course, are easy to manipulate. And you have all these different applications like VR that enable you to be able to jump into a space, perhaps with other colleagues, and look at objects and formulate plans and designs for improvements, for repairs, for a wide variety of things. This is important because the alternative is everybody hopping on a plane or everybody getting in a car and driving and taking a full day to go out and look at different things and plan things perhaps on site, or perhaps creating scale models, which is also very time consuming. So there's incredible efficiencies if you're able to bring your infrastructure into the digital realm. And so all you have to do essentially is Google digital twinning to kind of get a sense for how different people are tackling this problem. Because of course you need to get your objects, get your infrastructure, get your products into digital form to begin with. And then you need to devise a plan or figure out what software you're going to use to be able to properly utilize that. But there's loads of companies, from the aerospace industry to the architecture industry to consumer electronics industry, who are using this to great effect. Selfishly, I have an investment in a company called Arthur that is just a 3D collaboration space that is being used by several companies in the automotive space to be able to get together and look at models, rather than the old-fashioned giant clay models that they were producing. A bunch of companies, I think Volkswagen is kind of at the forefront of this, but rather than they now have a rule essentially that everything that they create needs to be digital first, so that they can use it digitally, natively. So I think that in the public sector, in the defense sector, this move to ensuring that everything that is created or built has a digital first element to it, and then your strategy for organizing that data and utilizing it properly presents tremendous benefits in efficiency, in cost savings, in speed to bring to market. And so I would encourage a deep kind of dive and understanding of that whole transition that we're seeing in the private sector, and ensuring that it takes place in the public sector as well.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, the digital twins is a real starting point for AR, right? You're not going to augment that unless you have that digital twin to begin to augment on top of. So that's a really great building block. How about you, Amy?
So let's talk about training just a little bit, because obviously that's an area that a lot of this group is familiar with. And I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. People know the studies that say, 53% better retention than reading and 33% better retention than video and all of that. But what I really think is interesting, and I'm starting to look at more, is that integration of spatial computing, or XR, and AI, and how folks are starting to look at integrating the two to be more personalized, to integrate again, natural language processing and computer vision and machine learning to actually elevate the training in that area. One of the companies that we work with is called Embodied Labs, and they're focusing on training for the aging population and simulating how training goes for understanding what it is like to age and be elderly and have physical ailments. Just in that space alone, I also think there's a lot of interesting healthcare and wellness related applications, and that can be applied to high first responders and anyone that's in a high stress environment, and those include mindfulness and treating chronic pain and PTSD. So there's a whole host of applications in that space I think is interesting as well. And then I was also going to hit on remote collaboration, the concept of being global and interacting more productively globally. I think it's just a huge time and cost saver.
I'm really interested in, and from personal experience and working in, and I know the military generally is, in dealing with PTSD and stress relief and helping to avoid that. I think there's some huge potential inside there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoy that we've had the chance to do this talk and hear from your insights in there. And I thank you for your time, but I really want to kind of wrap up with a question that's kind of a leading but challenging question. So many entrepreneurs shy away from selling to the government for a variety of reasons. From your perspective, what can government and programs do to attract entrepreneurs and make it easier for them to engage in this market and these important mission areas? Because these are some critical missions, whether it's not global defense, whether it's addressing PTSD and all the things with that. How do we better attract these entrepreneurs and the venture capitalists who back them? How do we make it so that there is more of a business case for engaging in this space?
Palmer Luckey, who was one of the founders of Oculus and also one of the founders of Anduril, was on a podcast last week called The 20-Minute VC, Harry Stebbings. Great podcast. Also really nice because it's only 20 minutes. And he talks about the challenges of dealing with the government. Highly recommend taking a listen to that. To take a snippet from what he discussed, it's important to not only provide money in the form of grants, SIVER grants, AFWorks, there's a bunch of different programs out there. But that's just cash. I think where companies are missing, where startups are missing help is more in just actually helping them navigate. Kind of the real value add of it is not just writing a check. The real value add of it is, can you help companies figure out how to navigate and how to properly sell into the government? It's not enough just to write a check. So programs designed to help startups engage, aside from just writing a check, and get real customers in the public sector, I think is really what's needed.
Yeah, and for the very early stage companies, that willingness and ability to iterate with those companies and be proof of concepts and design partners. I think that's really useful as well. So just that willingness to work with the technologies to understand what works best for the government and for enterprise in general.
Be willing to recognize it's not going to work always the first time.
It will not.
No, and thank you, Greg. That was a perfect setup for us, because that's what my team focuses on, is trying to help those companies as they're navigating this space here. And we plug into the government customers as kind of that bridge, because it's a massive enterprise out there. It's just as challenging to, how do you operate with an Amazon or with a Google or with an Apple? Those enterprises are almost as challenging as the government to figure out who's who in the zoo and how to actually make progress in there. Well, I want to thank you both very much for this. I think this has been a very useful and informative piece, and I really appreciate you taking the time to spend time with us.
Pleasure.
To be here.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Greg.